Hello and welcome to the Campfire Curmudgeon podcast. My name is Nicholas Edward Jones, and with me, as always, is my co-host Heidi.
Hey.
Today we're going to talk about
UFOs.
And what about them?
Well, specifically, we're going to talk today about UFOs or UFO sightings that took place in Arizona.
Ooh.
So, obviously we're doing that one because we live here.
Yeah,
Yay! But these are just some famous ones that you may or may not have heard of. We're just going to give you some brief descriptions of these, and a lot of them we may revisit and talk about a little bit more. Especially if you have any stories about, maybe some of these took place a long time ago, but maybe you have stories passed down from family members that know something about some of these sightings or these cases, I guess you could say, and we would love to hear about that.
Yeah, we kind of are driven somewhat by our listeners and their submissions, and we have a few today, so thank you for those that did submit. I really appreciate it.
We have one today, but you know.
One. That's
one really good one. How about that?
It's detailed and well, you know, I'm going to hear about it. So.
You're going to hear about it.
What's your experience with UFOs, and what's your background? Do you believe in them?
I absolutely believe in them, because to me, statistically...
But what is it? I want to clarify that, because there's several levels of believing in UFOs.
Okay, so
my level of believing in UFOs are, I can look up in the sky, see something I don't know what it is, and I'm like, that's a UFO, and it's an unidentified
we don't know what it
object. But do you believe... Let's say, do you believe in aliens?
Yes.
Do you believe they're here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I believe that statistically it makes sense that there would be at least one species on one other planet that have already contacted us.
I think the Drake equation doesn't fit here. I don't know. I think if they were here, we would know. Also,
I do believe that a lot of the time government tests things that they're not going to tell us about, because why would they be like, hey, there's a top secret thing, we're going to tell you about it.
Part of that requires a government and almost a world government cooperation, right?
No, not necessarily.
Because let's say they were only landing in France for some fucking reason, right? Let's say they were only landing in France, and the French government was keeping a button on it. But if U.S. intelligence services figured it out, or like, what's France's biggest geopolitical adversary? Probably Russia. Russia would blow the lid off of it, unless it was like... something
I think a lot of
UFOs
have
to conspire together.
I think a lot of UFOs, what I meant by that, are the government, like the U.S. government, testing a new aircraft they have. And I think part of...
I'd buy that for $1.
And I think part of the UFO part is they want to know what people see. They don't want to tell you, hey, we're testing an aircraft. They want to be able to say, like, what did people see? What did they hear?
Right.
How stealthy were we? How loud was it? How frightening was it?
Because we flipped the switch right before we went over an inhabited area.
Yeah, just to see, like, was this scary? Will this be a good scare tactic? Or
beyond classified, yeah.
Was it really easy to see? Things like that. But I do also think that there is a potential that extraterrestrials or aliens have come to this planet and maybe not necessarily made contact with government or anything. I don't think that we're that far in yet. I also don't discount UFOs potentially being from another universe, so maybe not even...
So,
like
not interstellar, but interdimensional.
Interdimensional, so not even necessarily being physically here.
The Indiana
like
Jones
we
and
can
the
see
Crystal
them.
Skull type of alien.
Sort of. Like more like maybe we're seeing a spaceship, but they're not seeing anything other than their normal route.
Right.
Because it's just like that tear that we're able to see for a quick second.
Sure, it's a disruption in our universe.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes you see stuff.
That at least fits within the boundaries of plausibility.
I think it's extremely plausible.
Yeah. Okay, so...
All right, curmudgeon.
That's what... I just wanted to establish, like, there are different levels of belief with with this topic.
So you don't believe in aliens, I'm taking it, because you kind of rolled your eyes.
I do believe in aliens.
Okay.
I don't believe they've been here yet.
Why?
I think it would be inescapable in the world of technology that we have.
And yet Trump's president, I mean...
I'm not saying, like, we're so awesome. I'm saying cameras are everywhere.
Yes.
And that's one of the things where all the UFO videos are back from, like, the VHS days.
But here's the thing.
Like, they're still showing the blurry VHS photos.
That's kind of like if you're going to, like, if you're going to come check out a planet, but you don't necessarily want the entire planet to know you're doing that.
Right.
As you see their technology getting better, maybe you're going to back off.
So they're time traveling. They know to go like back.
No, not necessarily time traveling. Maybe that as they've seen our technology advance, they're like, oh crap, these cameras are getting better. We got to stop this. Like we can't be flying over places anymore. We can't be as brazen. Yeah.
We're gonna have to go to somewhere where there's no.
We're gonna have to be a lot more sneaky about this.
Where is there a group of humans where there isn't technology?
There's a lot of places.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time too, people aren't like always having access. No,
I mean, so even if you go to like a country, like a poverty-stricken country, even a metropolitan area, like they have smartphones.
Not
like,
always.
I know, but
not always.
They'll have like one in 10 will have a smartphone as opposed to a populated area.
These statistics have not been
no,
checked beforehand.
I'm just guessing. I'm just saying, like it feels like at this point we've reached a point where smartphones, even the cheap ones, are ubiquitous. They're global.
Well, I kind of think about that too in like ways of, even though now we know about crime the second it happens in another area, I think crime has actually gotten less. I think we have less serial killers now because before it was like you could get away with it so easily, incredibly easily. Yeah. And
we're not quite at pre-crime like in Minority Report, but they're pretty good at like but basically.
People are more aware of like, if I do this, I'm probably going to get caught, so I'm not going to do this. Yeah. Versus before it was like, who's gonna know? Who's gonna catch me? Nobody. Yeah. It's like, so that's kind of what I think. Like
you could do that in the middle of a World Fair. Like,
yeah. Well, I think it's not obviously going to stop everybody.
No.
But I think it's the same kind of thing as it's like as technology gets better, certain things are going to stop happening as frequently. Right. So as technology is getting better, aliens are like smart enough. If they're smart enough to figure out how to get here from wherever they live, they're smart enough to be like, shit, these cameras are getting better. We should probably stop
Right, it's
this.
Called counter surveillance. It's like, what do they have the ability to see?
Oh, yes, obviously. Yeah. I mean, if we've got the ability to put all these satellites up and check out on different countries and stuff, they're probably watching us.
And we can estimate their capabilities. Yeah, it's like, well, we would extrapolate that. Let's say we found a planet that could sustain life, and then we find that there's electronic radiation and communications coming off of it, and we're like, okay, so they've developed at least technology, and there's Wi-Fi maybe, and radio signals, and it's like, okay, so what are they using the radio for? Are they using it for like broadcasting, or are they using it for radar? Is it like what's their ability to detect? And yeah, we would apply that. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off, but this is kind of it's a civilizational question. Basically, at some point, if you play Sid Meier's Civ games, at any point you'll realize like there are different, like every civilization hits certain benchmarks of their development. That's why like, oh well, we entered the Bronze Age. The humans entered the Bronze Age in like the a couple thousand BC, and then we moved for beyond them. And then there's still cultures that are in the Bronze Age. If you go to like an isolated island in the South Pacific that is like unknown to humans, they're in like this. They're in the Stone Age.
Unknown as we walk through there with cameras and we're filming them. They've never seen technology before.
We're violating the Prime Directive. And,
yes. Well, the stories I'm going to tell you, I'm going to start with one that took place in 1947. These are a series of photographs, since we were just talking about this. Mm-hmm. These are known as the Rhodes disc photos. This happened...
It's great for podcasting.
Why?
Our listeners are just eating these photos up right now.
I'm going to post them on the Instagram, you sassy. Jeepers, curmudgeon. On July 7th, 1947...
Right, so follow along on your Instagram.
Follow along on your Instagram. Or Google it. Everybody has a smartphone, like you just said. Anyways, a 30-year-old Arizona man took one of the first and most famous photos of flying saucers in the skies over Phoenix. So this was in the afternoon, late afternoon, about 4 o'clock. William Rhodes was in his workshop in Phoenix, and there had just been a thunderstorm. So he was standing on the back porch.
What time of year was this?
I don't know what time of year this was. Oh, July. So this was...
Must have been like monsoon season.
It was monsoon season. He heard what he thought was a jet. So he looked up to the sky to check it out, and he didn't see anything. And he went inside and grabbed his camera because he wanted to. He heard something coming and he couldn't see it, so he thought, all right, this is going to be interesting. He shot 2 photos real quick as this, what he described as a disc. It flew upward towards the clouds. Sorry about that. It took off.
As all of heaven spectated.
All of heaven. The crowd of clouds.
The crowds of angels in the clouds.
Ew. He said that he estimated the speeds to be between 400 and 600 miles per hour.
Mm-hmm.
Not really sure how you would estimate that, but that's what he saw. What he then did was he reached out to different media sources, different newspapers about this incident, and the Arizona Republic actually published his photos.
Mm-hmm.
He said that after this happened, he told this story in 1998. He told people that after his photo was published, a government agency, that's how he describes it, they asked to borrow the negatives of the photos, but then they never gave them back to him.
Interesting.
But you can actually, and this is something, this is what I'm going to post on the Instagram, is that picture from the Arizona Republic that they actually published. So that's what's going to be on there. And that's another one of those that's pretty interesting. In 1947, of course, film cameras, they weren't that great.
Mm-hmm.
They were nothing like we have today, especially if this thing is flying as fast as he said it was.
Right, and glinting off the sun.
But it's still something that's really interesting, the fact that he said it sounded like a jet. So it sounded like an aircraft, but it didn't look like anything that he had seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So I always find that interesting, too, that he went inside to get his camera. I'm not sure, like, I don't know if that's something I would necessarily do. If I just heard a jet, I wouldn't think anything of it. But I'm sure...
Jets were relatively new in 1947.
They were, and from what I've understood about this particular incident, I believe that he was kind of out in the middle, not in the middle of nowhere, but there wasn't a lot around him.
Right.
It was a workshop out in Phoenix when Phoenix wasn't built up like it is now. It was just, he was kind of in the desert.
Right.
So anything, I guess, maybe, and, you know, I don't know, maybe he liked to take pictures of jets anyways, or planes or whatever. We don't know. It doesn't really, I didn't find too much information on it. I just know that something about this seemed different to him and made him actually want to grab his camera to take a picture. Are you looking at a picture of those right now?
No, I want you to show. Can you turn your computer on and show me?
Yes, let me get that pulled up here.
We should just do this on iPad.
Should we? Why? Let me take here. So this right here, that's a picture of him pointing towards it.
Okay.
So that, do you see that?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, that's just, it's black and white and it's
shit. Can you try to describe it, though, for people listening? What do you see?
It's oval shaped and it kind of cuts off in a, not oval shape with a sharp end.
Yeah, I see like a real sharp point.
But what I see is, I was just going to mention this without looking at it. I started looking at, because a lot of the 1940s and 50s jet fighters, basically, they had started developing jet technology already,
yes.
In the middle of the war. But one of the United States' first jet fighters was called the P-80 Shooting Star, and a lot of them had this chrome reflective plating.
Yeah, they were all like that for the most part.
That silverish, very reflective, almost mirror finish if you go look at one up close in an aviation museum. And what that could be is just the nose of the thing. Right? You can see
even
the nose of it being
maybe.
reflective, and then the rest of it didn't show up on the exposure.
Well, here's the photo that they actually published in the Arizona Republic. Mm-hmm. So that's a picture of that. And it's even actually harder to see because...
Mystery Whatsis photographed over Phoenix.
Yes.
It's Whatsis, W-H-A-T.
Mystery Whatsis.
Mystery Whatsis photographed over Phoenix.
It's even harder to see in
the
this.
Arizona Republic, yeah.
Yeah, because they've taken his photo and then they've put it into newsprint.
Right.
In 1947,
it just looks like...
It's very hard to see what it is.
It's like an oval turd in silhouette.
But here's the thing. So, we can sit here and say, oh, it's hard to see, but
that's what even the newspaper called it a what's
this? But at the same time, people knew what their cameras could do. And so I'm sure a lot of people knew like that could be anything, but at the same time it was considered interesting enough to be published in the newspaper.
True.
So reporters thought it was unique enough or weird enough that they did publish this.
Or it's the slowest news day in Arizona.
I mean, hey, it could be. Well, I don't know. I think there is some interesting stuff happening at this time. We'll have to take a look at the rest of that newspaper, see if we can pull that whole thing up and see. But looking at this, it's called a disc, and I do kind of see that disc, but I also see like a weird sharp edge to it that I'm not really sure.
Right, I think that's like, it could be the oval nose of a jet, and then where it cuts off could just be that part of the paint, and the rest of it didn't get exposed on the film. And
it could be.
Like it's such a shit photo.
You're such a curmudgeon.
I know.
All right, let's go on to the next one. So you're going to destroy this too. This also took place in 1947. This took place in October though. This is the Dreamy Draw Dam incident. And I brought this up a little bit on my All Alone episode, where I read a little bit from my Weird Arizona book that mentions this. So this information is going to be
full of weird.
It's so full of weird, and I love it.
I do too.
This is going to be familiar to some of you, but I think that this incident is just so weird that I had to bring it up. So in October 1947, witnesses are said to have seen a 36-foot spacecraft that kind of crash landed into the area now known as Dreamy Draw Dam. It was, at the time, just Dreamy Draw Desert Park. It's near Piestewa Peak, which is just south of Highway 57.
Oh, so it was in the city of Phoenix. I mean, I'm sure at the time Phoenix was basically relegated to downtown. And
well, this was like a park. So this was, I don't really know. I think they had like picnic areas. It's near the Piestewa Peak, so it's like scenic. So it was a public area. But it was very, like, there's no buildings or anything really around there.
I think it was, Piestewa Peak is the second highest peak in Maricopa County. It's, I think it was named I think her name was Lori. Lori Piestewa, who was the first Arizonan and Native American to die in the second Iraq War. She died in, like, 2003, I think.
Oh, wow.
And it used to be called Squaw Peak, which was...
Yes, I do remember when it was called Squaw Peak.
And racist, so they decided to fix the problem by not taking away the Native American recognition, but replacing it with somebody who died for this country.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Was her first name Lori? I think I might have gotten that wrong.
I'm looking for that now. I don't see... yes, Lori Ann Piestewa.
Okay.
She is part of... I'm going to probably pronounce this wrong, so forgive me. I believe she was part of the O'odham tribe.
Odom?
Maybe?
Yeah.
I'm never certain how to say it.
But
I
was
told once by somebody
my
actually.
Ancestry goes back to Ireland, so
I was told by somebody in this tribe how to say it, and I feel so bad because I can't remember it.
My heritage goes back to Ireland, so it's kind of like O'Grady,
yeah, no, not quite.
Everything. It's like no, we have different.
No, this is a little bit different, but yeah, you're very right. It was. And do you know that a lot of people still call it Squaw Peak?
I do.
Like a lot of older people I'll still hear call it Squaw Peak.
Yeah, I've lived here 6 years, and I've encountered my share of people who named it that because that's what they grew up calling it.
And it's the second highest point in the Phoenix Mountains.
Yep.
The first highest is Camelback.
Okay.
So
yeah, there
you go. So kind of a nice little park area, and it came to rest right there at Piestewa Peak. Which is adjacent to downtown Phoenix, so kind of close to an inhabited area.
Definitely viewable.
So supposedly what the whole legend is that this thing crash landed and left like a big old crater, a mess. Supposedly the government went in, cleaned it up, and then in order to hide what happened, they built a dam. And that's something that a lot of people have said, like, why build a dam? Well, supposedly it left a huge crater, and they wanted to explain where the crater came from, and they wanted to explain why trucks had been there carting away the remains of whatever had crashed.
Yeah.
So they just immediately then began building this dam to try to cover it up, and they were like, oh, it's just construction, we're just building a dam. And the official version of why the dam was built, that was supposedly built in 1973 for flood control purposes.
Yeah, I was like, what dam? Oh, this is all basically now metro area, and SRP has just redone the canal system.
Yes.
Okay. SRP is the Salt River project. The Salt River is where Phoenix gets a lot of its drinking water. It feeds down out of the mountains in the Tonto National Forest.
Mm-hmm. Part of why this is considered by some controversial, and why like there is this whole legend, is a lot of people claim that this dam is useless, that it doesn't really actually serve its intended purpose, which I don't know how true that is, or if that's just poor planning. But so that's why a lot of people think that it couldn't possibly be for flood control. It was built to cover something up. And
or there's a history in the Southwest of waterworks and corruption and nefarious.
Yes.
That's the plot of the movie. It's the subplot of the movie Chinatown, which is amazing. So, and that basically goes back to history of basically the people who came in and were able to corrupt and like, hey, I want to build this thing, not because I think it'll do the most good for the population, but because I can make some money off of it.
I mean, we did have a lot of corruption here.
Yeah. Well, it was the Old West right up until 1914, this is when Arizona was made a state.
We had some really interesting stuff actually take place here, and it doesn't really fit in with this podcast. None of it was really paranormal, but it was really interesting, and I'm trying to remember what year all that was, because I believe that it was... So this was supposedly built in the 70s. I believe a lot of this activity was in the 70s and 80s that this was taking place.
1970s or 1870s?
19.
Okay. So...
that with the reporter that got blown up in his car with the car bomb. Yeah. So what I find so interesting, though, is that UFO crash supposedly happened in 1947.
Yes.
Supposedly, the dam, like paperwork, official documents state that it was built in 1973.
Yeah.
It's a big time gap, but supposed eyewitnesses claim that the dam, they were building it. They supposedly started it right after this crash, so I don't know if 1973 was when it was finished officially, or if when it was started officially. I'm not entirely certain about that. Everything I found just said the official version is it was built in 1973.
Yeah.
There was a book that came out in 1950 called Behind the Flying Saucers, and it has...
Do you know who it was by?
I don't, but I bet I could find out real quick. This book featured two men who pulled a couple of dead alien corpses from the wreckage and stored them in a freezer until the army picked them up. And I had actually heard the story when I was a kid that there was a crash here and these bodies were stored there.
I think I saw that on Fox.
Really?
the alien autopsy?
No. This is not the alien autopsy. That's something completely different. Although I was just watching a documentary on that.
I bet it's similar in one way.
In what?
That it's not true.
Not true. This book, Behind the Flying Saucers, this was by Frank Scully.
Frank Scully?
Frank Scully.
He's supposed to be on my side.
Why do you think that?
Because his name is Scully.
Nope, looks like he was not. He's an American journalist and a humorist.
Inside the universe of the X-Files, just off topic but on topic, inside the universe of the X-Files, Scully's an idiot for remaining to be a skeptic for as long as she did.
Says the curmudgeon.
Because if you lived in that world where all of that's immediately true, and there is a conspiracy, and there is monsters and aliens,
you would find a way. Knowing you would talk yourself out of it.
Inside the world of the show,
I still feel like you'd talk yourself right on out of it.
Then I'd be delusional. I don't want to be delusional.
I
As
actually
Matt Dillahunty
think
says, I want to believe as many things that are true and as few false things as possible.
I'm looking here. There's some information on him on Wikipedia where it says that he was exposed as a hoax for something. It's the only... So Behind the Flying Saucers was the only book that he wrote about flying saucers. And supposedly that whole story was a hoax that he actually was a victim of, I believe.
So that's a pretty elaborate prank.
I mean, but that's according to Wikipedia, and there's like one line on it, so, you know, do your own research. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, that makes for a really good podcast. I'm going to listen to this because it'd be really
We're not
cool
telling you what to think.
for these experts to like look this up and tell me these
yes,
stories.
I'm an expert.
And then be like, oh, do your own research.
Yeah, do your own research.
I suppose. I mean, it's more fun for me if they do their own research.
Yeah, well, you never do research anyways. Anyways, but when I was a kid, that's actually a story that I was told.
Yeah.
That like, oh yeah, crash. Like we had a crash here. These guys, they had these bodies. They were in their freezer, and the government came and took them away. You know, real Men in Black type story there. That's all the information I really have on that. I'd love it if you guys have heard stories about that growing up, or, you know, if you have any information on that Dreamy Draw incident, if you've heard a different version of that story, let us know, because I know there are some different details and different versions of the story. There was another sighting here. This was near the Marana Air Base in 1952.
Marana.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, Marana Air Base. That's basically North Tucson. For those. It's north of Tucson along the I-10, Interstate 10 that goes to Phoenix. Just for those who may not
northwest
be
of Tucson.
geographically aware.
It's now called Pinal Air Park. So, name is changed. This is a story from this particular airbase. There was a pilot. He was waiting for one of his students, and he was waiting to hear a radio transmission from them. And he noticed something that he described as like a bright star. And this was early in the morning. It was about 7:45 a.m. in April 3rd, 1952. So he never said anything about it. But then two of his colleagues also pointed out that they saw something that looked like an unusual mass hovering in place. One pilot...
It was also star-like?
This particular pilot, he thought it was a star, and he just kind of sat there, kept it to himself, but then other people started being like, hey, what is that? To where he was an instructor, and one pilot actually took off from the base in a plane to try to see what it was, because they said it looked like a weird metallic object. So they wanted to kind of chase it down and find out what it was. About 45 minutes after they all started noticing this UFO, it just vanished. They described it as real bright, shone like polished aluminum. One person said, I've been flying for 25 years and I've never seen anything like it. So they couldn't figure out what it was. The guy that went after it couldn't figure out what it was either. It eventually just kind of disappeared. The military reports that there were no balloons, no other aircraft in this area at the time of that. So to this date, it's just kind of something that remains unexplained. This airbase sighting, I
love the certainty of those. It's like, no, they couldn't have messed up, and then like 20 years later they look back and like, oh yeah, there was one plane in the airspace.
Well, I think, I feel like, you know, they probably would have just said yeah if there was something there. Like, oh yeah, sure, that was us, don't worry about it. It was 1952, how many planes did they have, and they just weren't keeping track of them?
A ton, because that's...
I don't feel like they weren't keeping track of them, though.
I don't know. Part of me is just like, oh, they saw a star or something really bright, and then also, like, when you look at it from a different angle, it's not just shining like a star. There's some, like, silver and metallic. Again, it kind of goes back to that aluminum or that silver chrome that the fuselages were made of.
What's interesting about this sighting is it's actually listed in the Project Blue Book. Okay. Do you know what that is?
I think you've talked about it.
It's the Air Force's top secret UFO study.
Yes.
So this is actually something that the Air Force had.
Mm-hmm.
They were studying UFOs. This is listed in there. It's got over 12,000 sightings listed in this book. These took place all over the nation from 1947 all the way to 1969. It was recently declassified, so this was made public. I think this is one it's been very redacted, so like when you go to look at it, it's mostly big black lines just kind of scribbled through it. But it includes hundreds of reports of
Amtrak recently
flying saucers and glowing spheres over Arizona specifically.
That's crazy. Amtrak recently released a document request that was from like the Freedom of Information Act request because of reporters or whatever. They have a page inside this Amtrak document. The entire page is redacted except for in the middle of the page, there's a line there's 3 words. It says, "No snack car." And you're like,
wow.
What? Like they redacted everything else on this page.
Except for no snack car?
Yes. I think I retweeted it on Twitter, but you'd have to scroll back a few days.
I don't twat.
No, I'm saying for our listening audience. So not just you, but the few people out there that our growing audience.
Our little audience.
Yeah, we
hello,
you.
little audience.
You can find it on my Twitter at Nicholas Edward J. But yeah, I just found that funny. Like when you talk about like governments redacting documents, like this is sensitive, and then somebody else in committee is also like, well, this is sensitive to me, and so it ends up like being released.
But the time it's done,
information.
I just think Project Blue Book in and of itself, it's real interesting if you can, now that it's been declassified, I'm pretty sure you can see the entirety of this book online now. Again, I don't know how much of it. I don't know if this is what I'm thinking of, this particular incident that's got a lot of information redacted, but it's a huge report, essentially. So there's lots of information, and it's really interesting that in this book that's nationwide, there's hundreds of flying saucers and glowing spheres specifically over Arizona.
I just think of the American Southwest, like that's where a lot of like our the second half of the 20th century was us gaining superiority in air power, but also because of jet technology and building our Air Force, and a lot of that was based in the Western United States. It wasn't done in the East. The East Coast was where they sent like Marines and Army to train, right, to go through basic and stuff like that. The West was Western United States, California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona was kind of the Air Force's playground.
Basically. But a lot of people also say that we got some of this technology. This was, oh, don't you sigh. What?
The Independence Day theory?
Sort of. It was alien technology or extraterrestrial technology.
I think we don't like to talk about it because we actually got it from Nazis. Nazi scientists.
I mean, Project Paperclip, you're not wrong. The next story I'm going to talk about...
Mein Führer, I can walk!
Oy. On that note, the next thing I'm going to talk about...
For those who don't get the reference, I'm not actually saluting Hitler.
Can confirm. His hands are down in his lap.
I'm describing the last scene of Dr. Strangelove.
Anyways, speaking of movies and scenes, some people may have heard of Fire in the Sky.
Yes.
That was based on...
Travis somebody?
Yes. That was based on happenings that happened to an Arizona logger named Travis Walton. Mm-hmm. And that was... 1975 is when this took place. This is something to where this individual, he has kind of been haunted by telling this story.
Right.
So what's interesting to me is sometimes people will make up UFO stories for one reason or other. Mm-hmm. This, I don't feel is necessarily the case. Yes, it was eventually made into a movie. I don't think he saw that coming. And his life has sort of been ruined by telling this story. He didn't really seem to have anything to gain and everything to lose, essentially.
Right, you lose credibility, you lose, basically the sympathy of your wife or girlfriend. If
they don't believe you.
You lose your family, and then it's just what do you gain out of it? Notoriety? I think
I mean, try finding a job when everybody thinks you're nuts,
Right. It's and with him, I think kids today, like, this is one of those movies.
Kids today.
I'm saying, no, like, hey kids, go watch this movie. I actually recommend it as a movie. It was made in 1993, and it's one of those movies that was made in like the 90s that it didn't stick around. Like, basically, it stuck around on VHS. I remember renting it at Blockbuster in the late 90s. But in the last, like, 15, 20 years, it's not a movie people really talk about anymore. It doesn't have cultural relevance, really.
My mom loves this movie.
Right. And it stars D.B. Sweeney as, the main character, Travis. James Garner, Scott McDonald, Henry Thomas from E.T., and Peter Berg, noted director nowadays. He directed the movie Friday Night Lights. He did the show Friday Night Lights. He did Lone Survivor, and I think Battleship. He made that.
This has been the movie podcast with Nicholas Jones.
But but anyway, like, it had some actual notable names to it, and it's a short 109 minutes.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the story.
It's a good movie.
It's a short little story, basically. On November 5th, 1975, Travis was one of the people working with a logging crew. Mm-hmm. He was 22 years old at the time. He noticed this metallic golden disc, and it was just kind of hanging or paused in the sky. It looked to be about 15 feet above a tangled pile of logs. And this is in a dense forested area in northern Arizona. This is near Snowflake, for those that know the geography of that area. He began to actually...
It's up in the White Mountains.
It's up in the White Mountains. So this disc, it was just kind of hanging there where all of the branches began to tangle. Like when you've got a lot of trees, they all kind of sort of like touch each other up at the top.
A thick
yes,
pine
at the time, this
area.
was a really thick forested area. So from what I understand... what he saw as a disc, it was actually below the tree level. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't very high. It was kind of hovering above the ground. So he began to approach this disc to see what it was, and he saw it kind of wobble, like side to side wobble. And there was a blue-green light that kind of came out of the craft and just sort of struck Walton. It lifted him up in the air, and it threw him. And there were actually witnesses to this, colleagues that had been with him in a pickup truck. Mm-hmm. They saw this happening. They freaked out thinking he was dead or something. They just kind of got back in the truck and drove away.
Yeah.
And after a while, they were like, oh, you know what, we should go check. We should see what happened. We should see if he's alive. They didn't know what it was. It scared the shit out of them. They just were like, we're gone. Sorry, pal.
We're gone.
But... they were like, ooh, that wasn't cool. Let's go back. Let's see if he's alive. When they went back, they couldn't find him. The craft or the disc wasn't there anymore, so they just started kind of looking around for him. When they couldn't find him, they went back into town and they told people what had happened. Right. They were like, something happened. Travis is gone. He was missing for 5 days, and... the police actually suspected that the group of loggers, they thought that perhaps there was an accident or that they had murdered him, that something had happened to them and they didn't want to tell the truth. So they were being investigated. And
put on like lie detector tests.
And people were they were looking for him. This was nationally publicized. They were asking people to, give them information if they saw him. And he reappeared naked and disoriented, and he said that he was on this spacecraft.
Yeah.
And there were silent, large-eyed extraterrestrials. He said that he came to regain consciousness aboard the craft already. So whatever hit him knocked him out, and he doesn't remember anything until he woke up there. He said that he was surrounded by these creatures that were short and bald and had these big eyes. So kind of what we think of
as a gray,
as like the typical alien, description people give. He states, I was looking squarely into the face of a horrible creature. It looked steadily back at me with huge, luminous brown eyes the size of quarters. So he actually describes the eyes as being brown, and I think sometimes when we see grays, they're kind of almond-shaped. Mm-hmm. He says they're just like big circles, basically, like quarters, which is really, for some reason, to me, creepier.
Yeah, I don't know.
Than kind of that almond eye shape, like just two holes almost.
No, yeah.
That's kind of spooky. He actually wrote a book also. This was also called Fire in the Sky. Mm-hmm. And he wrote about the whole experience. He says that he doesn't really remember much other than at one point he was looking around him trying to figure out how to escape, and there was just 3 of them that surrounded him real quickly. Mm-hmm. One of them put a helmet over his face. So I don't know if that means like on his head and over his face, or just like a surgery mask over his face, and he blacked out. For years he's had press come after him, investigators come after him, debunkers. A lot of the people have been really hostile.
I don't know. I mean, this is the part where it's like the press came after him. Usually reporters are like, if it's a 2-day story or a 1-day story.
This was not a 2-day story. Right. He was missing for 5 days, and this made national news.
I know, but
I mean, you hear about people that go missing. Like, there was a national manhunt for him.
But then the next news cycle starts up, and it's like, if you don't want to be bothered,
this was in the 70s.
Yeah.
There wasn't really a news cycle.
There was 3 national news networks and their news networks.
This was big because you had these loggers coming into town with this crazy story that their friend got abducted, basically.
Like, you murdered him.
And then they're thinking,
threw him into a giant chainsaw.
So everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is some sort of a murder. Uh-huh. And these guys are telling the most outlandish story. And then when he shows up, just wanders back into town, naked and confused, people were like, this is insane. What's going on? After everyone just assumes he was dead. So that was part of why he wrote this book, was people were already like, what happened? People wanted to know. Everyone was actually really interested in this. Yeah. So he wrote the book as a way to be like, here is my side of the story. Mm-hmm. I think part of why he did this was he didn't want to keep giving interview after interview. He just was like, here's the book, here it goes. Right. Done with it. Which is why a lot of people try to claim like, oh, he did it to sell books. And it's just like, he could have wrote a fiction story and said it was fictional and probably sold, just as many books. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, the sensational story does help, but it ruined his life. Yeah. And then again, when they made it into a movie, that kind of got more
echo resurgence.
Yeah, I believe he ended up. I think he was married at the time, and that ended up ending in divorce. He's just had a lot of bad things happen because of this story.
Poor Travis.
He's repeatedly, and to this day, he still says, no, this is true. And that's what gets to me, that whatever happened to him, he believes happened, because after so long, after, everybody saying stuff, you might eventually just go, oh, just kidding, guys, I made it up to sell a book. See, I'm not crazy. Right. He's never done that. Yeah. He's never just said, oh, come on, it was just a publicity stunt, I sold some books, great. He could have taken that easy out, but instead, to this day, he has claimed, this is real, this happened to me. And to me, that's kind of powerful. He's passed lie detector tests, which, I don't put too much
He's got conviction.
Stock on, but he's convinced. And the fact, too, that there was a lot of individuals that actually went to the police because they were like, something happened to our friend, he's not there anymore. That's interesting, something happened.
He has conviction. I'll give him that.
What do you think about that one?
I don't know.
Just that he has conviction?
I think that he had an experience and he's thoroughly convinced of it. Who knows if... we don't... He's a logger, so he's... it's like I could make assumptions about, like, was he also, like, a drinker or...
Actually, I believe all of these individuals were Mormon and did not smoke or drink.
Okay. Which is very common.
Which was what made them more credible.
Right.
Was they came completely sober to the police station.
To make an assumption about, like, drug habits or, alcohol. And it's like, well, it's funny because it's like, there's a significant portion of my excusing away thing.
Travis was Mormon, and I believe, 3 of the 5 other people that witnessed it, or maybe even more of them, they were also Mormon, and none of them had been drinking or anything at the time that they experienced this. So that was what lent such credibility to it, and that's why police didn't just dismiss it as like, oh, you're a bunch of drunk crazies. They were like,
Yeah.
something happened and you guys must have done it, because they were just like, something happened. These guys are clearly shaken up.
Yeah.
Something went down. So I think that that's probably one of the most interesting ones. I've seen Fire in the Sky a long time ago. It's a 1993 film. I definitely want to rewatch it because I just think it's so interesting.
I'd recommend it just for the inside the UFO sequence.
Yeah.
It's there's not a lot. Like a lot of the times when filmmakers try to do zero gravity and they're not already in space, or they don't get on the vomit comet like Ron Howard did for Apollo 13. Like when they try to film zero gravity, a lot of the time it fails. This movie has a very interesting and I think compelling depiction of zero gravity that was really effective.
I would say so. I think it's a fun film. It's really interesting. And it might creep you out a little bit if you're like me.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about another kind of famous one that you rolled your eyes at earlier, Nicholas.
Okay.
The Phoenix Lights in 1997.
They were flares.
They were flares?
Mm-hmm.
So, do you remember when you and I watched the whole thing debunking why they were flares?
Yes.
Yes.
And I said, oh, they couldn't have been flares.
Yes, and now you're saying they were flares.
I'm going with the
wishy-washy curmudgeon.
Going with the official story, depending on the mood I'm in.
Yeah, well, when
it's 2017,
I wish I remembered. Can you look and see what the name of that documentary was?
No,
do you remember?
I don't remember.
We watched a documentary on it, and they showed very specifically why they didn't appear to be flares. Also, my mom saw these when this happened, 1997. We were driving at night when this was taking place. This was March 13th, 1997. People saw a string of glowing orbs. They hovered over the area of Paradise Valley. They were seen for a 3-hour time period. And some people saw what appeared to be a straight string of lights. Some people saw a V-shaped formation that passed silently over an area of 300 miles. This is from the Nevada line through Phoenix to the northern edge of Tucson. This is where people were calling in. I mean, there were calls to 911. People were saying they thought it was a spacecraft some people said, I see a spacecraft, I see a UFO. Some people thought that they just had been witnessing an airplane about to crash because it was so low. Some people were outside at the time and they said they felt just the rush of air. They felt something go over to where they ran inside and called 911. They said, I think a plane is crashing because it felt like it was so close. Part of why there was so many reports of this, there was supposed to be a comet, I believe just maybe one comet or a group of comets that night. So people were watching the sky hoping to catch this comet.
If you get like a space forecast and say, oh, the Leonids are coming in, so everybody's going to have like a watch party or a star party.
So there was a lot of people that were sitting out on their patios, their porches, looking for this. There were thousands of witnesses. There's hundreds of photographs. So we'll put up a photo or two of this as well, because a lot of people had their cameras out to see if they could take a picture of the comet. The military, that's who claims later that it was just flares. They're claiming that hundreds of pictures and thousands of people were tricked by flares. I don't know about you, but I mean, I know a little bit about how flares work, and I'm pretty sure they don't travel that far, 300 miles. I mean, people saw them overhead. People saw them coming overhead and continuing on.
Right.
People didn't just see them staying.
Imagine a tiny hot air balloon
in one place
where the basket is not full of people. It's a phosphorus candle.
Yes, for 3 hours.
Yes.
They don't stay in the air for 3 hours.
Yes, they can.
No, they can't.
The hot air balloon
Google
can.
it. A hot air balloon can, but they're claiming that they were flares.
They're widely promoted. The Phoenix Lights are widely promoted by ufologists as evidence of alien spacecraft, despite confirmation by the United States Air Force that a squadron of A-10 Warthog aircraft was dropping flares over the area that night as part of a training exercise.
And I've seen these training exercises. I've lived here my whole life, and I've seen them do the stuff with flares.
Yeah.
It looks completely different. It looks really cool.
I haven't seen it at night.
I have. It looks very neat. But the flares, they almost look as if they're dripping. It looks like lava or something dripping down. That's not what these looked like at all. These were like a string or a V shape of lights that stayed together. Even if you all drop flares at the exact same second, they don't look the same.
Mm-hmm.
One's gonna fall first. They don't stay like a perfect string. That's not how it works. One of the witnesses was, at the time,
Mm-hmm.
governor of Arizona, Governor J. Fife Symington III. They were convinced that this was not flares. This was published in newspapers. People were willing to come forward and give their names and what they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And people were convinced that, these were not flares. People that had even been in the military that had used these flares themselves, they said, these are not flares. These are not like anything that I have seen. So what's your take? You still think they're flares?
I do. I think. Well, okay. So I'm reading it. I pulled up an article from Skeptic magazine from 2008. It was right after NBC aired a Dateline special that says 10 close encounters caught on tape. So basically, it's like, people talking about the Phoenix Lights again. And this reporter Tony Ortega, he helped to debunk it while he was in Arizona, but. For starters, he says there were two separate events on the night of March 13th, 1997 over the skies of Arizona. The mysterious V configuration of lights that so many people of the state witnessed and seen over Prescott at about 8:15 p.m., traveled south to Phoenix about 8:30, and then Tucson at 8:45. That's 200 miles and 30 minutes, which means the V was moving at about 400 miles an hour. Some early eyewitnesses said it was high in the sky. Others swore that it was low and moving very slowly. As months passed, more and more elaborate and ridiculous claims were made by eyewitnesses who were clearly trying to one-up each other. As I've pointed out many times, the eyeball is a poor instrument for judging the altitude of point sources in the night sky. Simple physics suggests that the V was high in the sky and moving very fast, even if it looked like it was moving slowly due to altitude. So yeah, it was basically like he said there were two things happening. One was aircraft. The V was moving 400 miles an hour because it was seen in Prescott. It was seen then in Phoenix, and then it was seen in Tucson. And that's about a 2-hour drive from Phoenix either way. Basically, you go north, you can get to Prescott. You go south, you can get to Phoenix. So that's a huge swath of time. That's
a very big.
That's an experimental aircraft. As far as the low, slow moving.
That's what I was wondering.
That's the flares.
I mean, honestly, what I wondered about.
We live in the Air Force's playground.
We sure do.
We are guinea pigs.
What I always wondered is if that was possibly the V-shaped, what some people call the stealth aircraft that we began testing in the 90s. I don't know the name of the aircraft, but I know this is an aircraft that the government had been working on to. What they wanted was to find something that wasn't very detectable by radar.
Yeah.
But also I wonder if they were trying to see what people saw at night. Again, kind of like I brought up, I'm wondering if they were trying to see what people thought. Like, could people tell it was an aircraft?
Or was it a flight? Or was it a squadron of aircraft that basically had...
well, how easy was it to see?
Yeah.
I don't think it was a squadron of aircrafts. I mean, it could have been. People, they do fly in formation, and they do fly
in a V.
In a V.
Yeah, have you ever seen the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds?
But when you see the Blue Angels, like, you'll notice every once in a while one's like slightly out of line or whatever, like when they change position and stuff. And these just seemed like the lights on it seemed so perfect.
Well, also if you've ever seen planes fly in the missing man formation, it's basically a V that's off kilter because one of the planes is missing intentionally. They're flying for a fallen comrade.
Well, this spacecraft, a lot of people call it the Aurora craft, and rumors of this came about in the mid-1980s. Scramjets. Supposedly, though, there is no evidence that this has actually been created, that this has been built, but I feel like I have seen that we do have something that's like a triangle. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Basically a B-2 or the B-3.
I think it's the
stealth
B-3.
Bomber. They're both...
Are they both triangles like that?
Yeah, they're both like flying wings.
Yeah, those have kind of like a triangle shape, and that's what I'm wondering, because like if you look along the front of it, if there were lights just along the front, that would look like a V shape.
Yep, definitely.
So, do you know when we began work on these?
Oh, the B2 was classified for a long
time, because I think that this is probably something that they were working on early 90s. So 97 would be right about perfect for this.
Yeah. So
that's actually what I've always wondered, if that's what it was. But to me, again, it's just weird that now that we know this thing exists, why not just say like, oh, that's what the Phoenix lights were. I don't know. Is that kind of weird?
Yeah, I think part of it's the Air Force, like, well, if
we made a story, let's stick to it.
Right, and also it's like, well, we're not going to apologize or re-edit our official disclosure.
Seems weird, though.
But also, like, if you see things now, could that be the Aurora craft that they're working on? Like,
maybe.
It basically, like, it gives them cover to say what they said back then and hold that story for if anything happens now. Because every once in a while it'll be like...
That's true. They could be like, oh, that's just one of our aircraft.
Yeah, or like every time like there's been a bump, or like we get earthquakes, but the ground's so solid here and we're not really near any fault lines.
Yeah, those weird...
That we just feel it when it happens further away and it's big. Basically we'll feel like a thud.
Like everything just kind of bounces for a second.
Yeah, and then it's like that was an earthquake, because basically there was a point at night one time where it felt like it was the middle of the night and it was very quiet, and it was cool enough here where I had my windows open, and I felt this thud about as loud as a car door outside slamming. But then, like, I was on social media at the time, and people were like, "Earthquake here, big one," and it was just like, "Oh, that's what an earthquake is," because basically the rumbling of an earthquake.
But to us, we would not have
through the ground. But if you spread those waves out far enough, there would just be like one wave that makes it through somehow. And
it was like the other ones were so small we couldn't detect it. All we felt was just the one big enough bump.
So, and then it's like, oh, also like the Phoenix lights, if they happened again, would probably be the most documented thing on.
I mean, I don't know, because I think now we see so much stuff in the sky that we just are kind of like, whatever, it's a plane.
Yeah, was that a satellite? Like, let me pull up my star map on my phone and see.
I do have an interesting UFO story that was sent in from a listener.
Yes, please. Let's do this.
This was sent in from an anonymous listener, so a little mystery there.
Thank you, Anonymous.
Anonymous says, "Hey all, I just heard your first episode. Interesting stuff. I saw that you were looking for content, and I've got a story I wouldn't mind sharing if you're up for it."
Yeah, I need that I need that content.
It has to do with UFOs. This individual, they stayed anonymous, but they stated that they were from Arizona.
Okay.
So once upon a weeknight, a friend and I were hanging out on their back porch, smoking and chatting about whatever nonsense we were interested in at the time. I was sitting in the chair that faced my friend's back patio door, with my back facing the backyard's perimeter wall behind me. So their back is to the wall and they're facing the house, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
We were knee-deep in interesting conversation when suddenly I get this tense, defensive sensation that overcame my entire body.
Like a fight or flight?
That's what it sounds like. It was like my conscious mind couldn't process the danger. So my basic survival instinct kicked in, and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. Something was right behind me, and I had to fight in order to turn around. It's that feeling when somebody's behind you and you're like, do I even want to look? You get like petrified.
Perimeter wall
so something is behind him and he's facing the house.
Right. So here in Arizona, a lot of the houses are like a backyard isn't like for the most part, like I grew up in the Midwest, and
where
it's all just chain link fences or maybe a wood fence on every once in a while.
These are stucco
in
or
Phoenix, they're cinder block.
And
they're about 6.5, 7 feet high.
Most of them are right about 6 feet.
Right, and they usually
maybe a little lower. You can usually peek over, stand on your tippy toes.
And they have a gate into the back alley usually, and that's where you
either the back alley or it'll be towards like the front of your house for some people.
Right. So that's kind of when we talk about backyard for perimeter fence, it's not a fence the way you would maybe
No,
think
it's,
about it.
and a lot of these are, a lot of the houses here are, you've got fence after fence after fence. All the backyards are touching another backyard. So I'm not sure if, like, where the fence was or anything, but it sounds like basically there wasn't much behind our anonymous person here.
But what if something was on the other side of that wall and he felt it?
And I guess that's kind of that feeling. So it says, finally I jerk my head around and I'm instantly blinded by this light that immediately swooped away upward and to the left through the neighbor's trees. The light instantly shut off as it ruffled through trees further down. I was so blinded I could only tell it was up in the trees moving quickly. The disturbance stopped and I kept looking at the tree line. Mm-hmm. Finally, I turned back to my friend who was either too terrified or too stoned to understand what happened. I didn't say a word. I kept trying to think it was the neighbor messing with us, and the rustling was just unrelated animals in the trees. After a while of moving on discussion, my friend says, "Was there something in the trees a moment ago? Like a light or something?" "Yeah, man. What the fuck was that shit? Your neighbor? That was fucking crazy. We've not talked about it since." That's the story.
That's creepy.
Isn't that creepy?
That's one of those, yeah, like if, I can imagine the one guy being stoned and he's processing the same amount of information, but because he's stoned, it's like there's a delay. It takes place
after.
Yeah.
What it seems like is he turned around and he or she, if for some reason it sounds like two dudes, they turned around and their friend was just like staring. So it was almost as if their friend did process it, but was just like, it was just so scary or so just surprising that they almost didn't want to bring it up. And it was that thing of after they kind of talked about, it says moving on discussion, so I guess like when they talked about other topics, that fear kind of ebbed to where their friend could then be like, now that I'm not scared anymore, I'm okay to talk about this thing we saw.
Yeah, one of the quickest ways to silence someone is to make them fear.
Yeah.
Right? Just kick in that fight or flight, and then just like, the quieter I am, the safer I am. Right.
Right. I just think that's interesting too. It was almost like, because you'd think, wouldn't they just run back into the house? Mm-hmm. They said they're facing the house, they're right there. But maybe it was just like frozen, like they couldn't get out of the chair, so they just keep trying to talk about something else. They're so creeped out.
I don't know what that is. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
What's creepy to me, because a light could definitely be the neighbor, like, hey, you kids stop smoking, or you people stop smoking.
Right.
You could easily see, or even young kids being like, hey, my neighbor gets stoned, let's scare them. But what's interesting is it sounds...
It's a tiny light, and it...
Yeah, well, but it sounds like it was a really big light. I mean, you shine any light in someone's face, it seems big. But what's interesting is, let me check here. It sounds like it continued on through other trees and other
still made noise as it moved through branches.
Branches in other backyards. Yeah. So like it continued through other trees.
And it's like if you're a drone operator, the drone is not going to fly through a tree. You're going to mess it up.
Well, rustling.
Maybe it was Tinkerbell.
Tinkerbell?
It was Tinkerbell.
I'm going to slap you. It sounds like, I don't think it was something necessarily maybe in the trees, but almost like if something goes past the trees really quickly, like the sound. Yeah. And I don't know how long ago this took place, so, drones are pretty common now.
I don't think it's a drone.
You don't think so?
I don't know what it is, but yeah.
What's weird is they don't say that they heard anything. There's no information not like I heard something, it's I felt something behind me before seeing a light, before hearing noise, before anything.
Right, and this person has been around long enough where they could, they know what a drone sounds like now. They know what a drone looks like, how it behaves and moves. Yeah. And if I think they would have maybe thought it was a drone, like in hindsight, he would have included that. He's like, I think it could have been a drone, but no. I don't know what that was. That's just weird.
Isn't that interesting?
And it did provoke just that sympathetic response. I got a little bit of goosebumps.
So I don't know, curmudgeon. What would you do?
The curmudgeon answer is I don't know what that is. I don't know. It's perfectly valid as an answer.
I don't know how I would react in a situation like that. I don't know if I would be the friend just sitting there like, hey, 5 minutes ago, did you see that? Or if I would immediately be like, going inside, leaving you out here, goodbye. Yeah. Like, I don't know, my flight or fight might just kick in and I might just flight real fast. But that's a great story.
Yeah, thank you.
We also, in the same email, got another story from the same anonymous listener that I'm going to be doing.
I figured if it was in the same email, it was written by the same person.
Well, you never know. Sometimes people include their friend's story.
Sure.
This is a really interesting story that I'm going to use for another episode. Okay. So we'll revisit this email here.
Okay. In closing, what are we doing for a promotion that we have going?
For a promotion, well, we're going to do a little contest. We actually have a Campfire Curmudgeon tote bag. That's another thing we'll put up on the Facebook and the Instagram. We'll put up pictures of what that looks like. It's just got our logo, the same logo you see every time you listen to our podcast. And there's a couple ways that you can get in this contest. One of the ways is
to like us, subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on iTunes.
So on iTunes, you can either rate or review us.
That definitely helps up with the rankings, and it helps us get new listeners.
Makes us easy to find.
Add to our audience.
So just a quick little one. Of course, we'd love a great review, but if you think we suck, that's fine too. You can still be in the contest.
Rate us 5 stars.
I don't know why you'd want the tote bag if we suck.
You can write whatever you want. But rate us 5 stars.
Okay, rate us 5 stars. Don't tell them what to rate us. So you can either rate and review us, or you can subscribe to us on iTunes. Okay. On Facebook, if you can like our page, that's just the Campfire Curmudgeon page on Facebook. You can either like it, or you can share this page. You can also follow us on Twitter.
Yes.
And if you do any of these things...
I've gotten back to us in Twitter. Well, I would say if you follow us on Twitter, it doesn't really help us as much as iTunes. I don't want
You're still in the contest.
Okay.
If you do more than one, you're going to get more than one entry.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. If you think that's not fair, you don't have a Twitter. I don't have one. Make one. I don't know.
Yep. Follow us at CF Curmudge on Twitter. CFCURMUDG.
And you can also find our Twitter, our Instagram, everything on our Facebook. That makes it real easy. Or on our website, we have links. Once you've done this, if you could pretty please just give us a screenshot showing that you liked us, shared us, rated, whatever, and email that to us or send it in a message on Facebook. And what you'll need to include is your name and how we can contact you. So if you win, we can find out where we're sending that tote bag.
Yes, Campfire Curmudgeon tote bag.
Yay! And you can email us at campfirecurmudgeon@gmail.com. Yep. You can also find all that on Facebook or on campfirecurmudgeon.com. Nicholas, what are we doing next weekend?
We are going to Los Angeles Podcast Festival.
We are, and what are we going to do there?
We're going to record some segments for an episode.
We're going to podcast.
Yeah, we're going to just...
So hopefully we're going to find some people that have had some paranormal stories or weird experiences, and we're going to get their stories as told by them, and you guys are going to get to listen to that. Join us for that experience there. And if any of our listeners are going to be at LA Podfest, come say hi.
Yeah, come say hi. We'll either be in the lab, but we'll also be staying in the hotel, so we might record a few in the room.
Yeah, if you are going to be there and you have a story, let us know. We'll meet up. We'll get your story.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. Have a good rest of your morning, evening, whatever.
Keep the campfire burning. Bye.
Bye.